our mission is to create business value from what humans value. And when we talk about humans, we talk about the bigger sense of humanity, or at least that's what we try.
I'm a managing director and partner at BCG's Digital Ventures. In a nutshell, what we do is invent, launch, and scale businesses. And so we'll take an idea or a clean sheet of paper and develop a core idea around a client's assets, IP, or advantage, and then launch that into market through an MVP process and scale that to be $100 million to a multi-billion-dollar business, which we've had a number of exits at that level now.
I've been a bit of a startup junkie, and I love technology. I had the great privilege and honor to sit on many different sides of the table, from large corporates to the very smallest startups, basically being a solopreneur, right? I love just getting deep in the weeds, and currently with BCG, love just helping the largest companies on the planet think like the smallest companies on the planet, and just really employing lean, agile ways of doing things, and how we could use tech to really advance society.
And we're going to hit our topic of the day, which, to remind all of you out there, is tech and society. We're going to hit that by focusing on on the role of technology for positively shaping society. I think we've all had too much doom and gloom. We've had enough of it, haven't we? And so let's go to blue oceans, to open skies, to the amazing possibilities that tech has for making our future lives better.
Everything has its positive uses and its negative uses, but I do believe that every one of these tools that comes to the fore, whether it be a printing press and cave paintings or Twitter, does create positive opportunities and positive inspiration. And certainly during this time of disruption and change, and we're all over the world right now and not sitting in the same room, it does connect people together. And I think that's one of the great benefits, is that we've got a chance to really sit together and spend time ideating, thinking, creating, co-creating. And these communication tools certainly are a key part of that.
Technology is just part of our life, right? It's like oxygen. It's not a choice, it's a fact. And something interesting, if you look at like machines, maybe from the time of Leonardo da Vinci, it was visibly possible to actually see and understand what they were doing, right? There was like a wheel turning around or some things moving, and that was very evident. But then nowadays we have computers that are just boxes and everything is invisible. And so that's kind of like a challenge, right? And to try to understand who's writing that code and what's behind it. So they're always like two sides of things.
I'm reminded of a story, an experience rather, that I had back in 2005 at Universal. At the time, CD sales were falling off a cliff. I was fortunate enough to come across a small startup at the time called YouTube. And at the time, I had drank the Kool-Aid, and we saw it as an enemy. We were like, oh my God, here we go, another peer-to-peer network. That's another Napster. This is going to destroy our new thriving music video business. But, obviously, over time, unfortunately, it took a little longer than we would have liked. We started to embrace this new platform. And as CD sales truly fell off a cliff, the music industry really embraced streaming. And what was thought to be an enemy ended up being the biggest godsend for the recording music industry. So it's interesting how the pendulum quickly swings back and forth, based on what's going on in society. And technology is a great enabler of these things.
Listen, Juliana brought up a really good point about the invisible box. Things are now exist not so much in front of us, but we have this sort of objectified idea. And so if I sit and hold up this, you guys all know what it is and what it does, but it's powered by something far beyond that I have no control over. So I'm really optimistic about the idea that these positive influences can be fed into whatever viewing device we have. And Elijah touched on it with the whole idea of, sort of parenting through the video capability. if we can improve the quality of content, improve the connectivity, improve the experience. I mean, Elijah and I were just talking this morning about how this whole video capability is still really nascent, right? It's been around forever, but it's really nascent. If we can improve all of these services and functions, I think it could actually create a much better fabric for us as a society and as a network of people.
There's so many obvious pain points and frictions, from bandwidth issues, people talking over each other and not muting, and these are simple things that you would have thought would have been solved, 20 years ago. I think Skype's about 20 years old now, but we're still encountering the exact same pain points and frictions that we had when video conferencing first existed.
So, nudging is about these little pushes, these little architectural, your environmental, your people's environment, or the tech and the usability aspects of it itself, to nudge, to push behavior in one direction or another. How do we mix design with technology to ensure that technology flows and works with us as humans, as opposed to sort of making our lives more difficult, which many people say technology has done?
I think more and more we're going to start seeing less UI. And maybe it's voice interaction, but nonetheless, it's UX, it's user experience, and it's just really drilling into the psychology of what people truly love, not what they like, but what they love and what they need, right? And how they access it. Is it through saying, "Hey, okay, Google, hey Siri, hey, whatever," or is it through typing on a keyboard? Again, I see design really it's less visual design. It's more the experience design. People always assume design is, pick up this pen and paper and draw me something beautiful, right? But I think it's really evolving right now, and it's quite, it's a great time.
I think you either are solving for frictions or you're pushing new features to help people adopt. Do you factor positive experience into your design? When you start to think about how people interact, it should be completely transparent, but do you factor that positive, what we call surprise and delight, into your experiences?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you always try to do that, and but we can only work with hypotheses that we then have to test, right? Because there's sometimes it's really difficult to predict how. Maybe you design something and you think, oh, the user will love it, and then you do a test and you see that there's a problem that you didn't foresee at all.
How are we going to use tech to make society better? And what do the three of you see as the most likely big ideas of, big uses of tech that are fundamentally going to change either how we're governed, how we organize ourselves as society, how we as citizens shape our own futures through government or outside government, or economies, or any of those kind of big sort of macro topics?
Hey, listen, I think there's a range. And again, this spectrum idea, it's everything. It's giving everyone a voice. We have that ability to have a speaker and a microphone attached to every human being. But now how do you take that into societal change, governmental influence? And I think we're about to hit a really interesting moment, given the US election coming in November, where that voice is going to end up being very virtual, but very impactful. And that's what I think, though, is the voice piece is going to be the really critical step for us going forward.
A lot of content is driven by how it's produced, and who's behind it. And sometimes it's about the loudest person in the room, right? And which could really tilt the scales in a very unfair, unbalanced way. But we all have technically the choice to decide what we consume and what we don't consume. At least we think we do, right? Because there's a lot of curation and programming still. But I think it's on us to really encourage proper use of content production, and really trying to make sure that the messaging is fair, clear, and used for good. But as there's good, there's always bad.
It's interesting. There's an assumption though that people will do the right thing, right? And so I actually have to give a plug for a friend of mine who's built something just out of his garage, basically. It's called bluewhitered.org. And as you know, in the US, we have blue states and red states, and there's a perspective on how all of this politics, how all the political things are playing out. His bluewhitered.org shows the blue version, the red version, and the white version of the news feeds that are going on. So you can see the balance or imbalance of that. And I think those are the types of things that are going to have to start to teach people content production, and fair and balanced is the watchword of the day. But I'm just curious how we inspire people to do positive things with media. Elijah's idea around making sure that people are learning how to produce, fair and balanced content. And I've totally appropriated the words. But people will do what they do. We can teach them standards, but we can't hold their hand while they're operating the camera. Is there a design approach that helps people build the right thing or do the right thing?
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting question, because the whole ethical question, I think there used to be a time when, even when I was in design school, there was kind of a culture of the ethical role of a designer. And I think there were designers in the past that, for example, Buckminster Fuller or Victor Pape, they really tried to have this they had this mission. And again, I think we've gotten much more clout in the business world, and we've explored technology. And now I think we almost have to go back a little bit to the humanities and to bring back these kind of ethical things. But as a whole, as a society, that's also changing, because maybe in the past it was linked to religion or some kind of other institutions that provided some kind of a value system, and even that is changing, right? So what are we adhering to in terms of values? That's not so clear anymore.
Do you think technology is going to kind of bring together the public and private sector, or is technology going to allow us as citizens to leapfrog and actually disrupt the whole concept of governance?
I've got sort of what I was saying at the beginning of, helping big companies think small and small companies kind of become big, I guess. Governments are inherently, they're bureaucratic. These are very large bloated systems. They have a very difficult time being quote unquote agile, right? And this is why Amazon is doing what they're doing, because they still behave like a startup to a certain extent. If governments had a more authority over how technology was produced and deployed, I think it would really slow down innovation. And unfortunately, a lot of innovation, it's not by playing by the rules, and a lot of corners are cut. And governments can't cut corners, in my opinion. I think the bureaucratic layers. There's some silver linings to it, and that slow and steady could often be safe. Where a small 2-3 person Silicon Valley startup, they're going to blitz scale. They are on a mission to just grow as fast as they can, and that may require hurting people, right? And this is where I think I'm conflicted there, where there's a fine line.
We go back to the foundations of the internet and DARPA's investment and involvement. Every startup that is of any kind of scale has investors, and if you dig deep enough, you may find that the government is part of that investment pool, whether it be our government, your government, their government, doesn't matter. I think it's going to be a lot less clear who is the proprietor of said technology, right? Mm-hmm. I can see a case where Twitter tomorrow gets appropriated by the government. Next thing you know, we have a governmental agency running a communication tool. At some point, that watchdog transparency piece is going to be really important. Otherwise, we'll be back in Elijah's conversation about the conflicted moment of, helping people or hurting people.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I find it kind of interesting that now, it seems like there's a tipping point in terms of the whole investment or kind of money culture, that we're talking about moral money. And it seems like finally, after years of greenwashing, big companies, they know they have no other choice than to think about social and environmental context, but in a serious way. We all depend on each other in a way, and maybe we have to work together and be not so selfish and think about the greater good.
I would argue in some ways, if you look at the traditional definition of the need for government, what's it for? And it's to resolve at a central level things that people don't do on their own as individuals, because it requires a type of organization and a coordination that can't happen. We have communication tools now that are much more sophisticated than anything we've ever seen. So we are able to organize ourselves differently. So the intense pressure that citizenry will put on governments by self-organizing as a way to kind of get what they want when they're not getting it from the government, because the government starts to become obsolete.
It's funny you mentioned that. I wonder. Elijah was talking about two small kids at home and running the teaching center. I wonder if this moment will teach a lot of parents about the value and investment in our teaching pool. Do you think that teacher salaries over time will start to increase because parents now have a single source experience of what it's like to run a classroom? Those are the types of things that I think inspirationally could be really valuable and really positive. I tend to believe that as humans, we sort of fall into the most comfortable pattern, but I'm looking at all of these different trends and wondering what's going to change based on this last 3 months or the continuing 6 months that we have ahead of us.
Yeah, I can certainly say I value educators so much more. One of the best things we could do ourselves is educate and empower the youth and really kind of democratize education and bring that kind of adaptive learning and just start to encourage that, good nature and that good spirit early, right? And discourage the hate, discourage the manipulation, but start it as early as possible. Don't wait until they get into college, right? And I think we have an opportunity right here, right now, especially with a lot of the digital learning tools that we're starting to innovate around.
The well-functioning of democratic society has always been based on sort of, in some ways, equal access, equal education. If you don't have that, then you get problems. So where is this going to go? I mean, how's this going to work with government and access, and who's going to win and lose in terms of countries or different types of societies and how they're organized, or however you want to think about it?
Yeah, let's not forget the idea of access starts with connectivity, though. All right. So I think one of the big things that's come out of this last 3 months is the lack of connectivity for a lot of students. But now you have to have access to vote, to get educated on the issues. Then you got to have the content provide a fair and balanced way of understanding that. So there's this sort of chain of events that have to occur. But the first place is connectivity.
But on a general scale, I would say access, there's much more access nowadays than there used to be 100 years ago, right? So it sounds like we are going into the right direction. Maybe there's still some things to be improved, but many more people in the world have access to information than they used to, which is very positive.
I'm just going to ask each of the panelists if there's any kind of parting words, just 1 minute parting words that you might want to share.
I would just encourage everyone to really use your critical thinking. I think this time needs a lot of that.
Yeah, on the note of education, I'm a huge advocate of bringing it as early as possible, and just not discounting the youth. Just because their age is a single digit doesn't mean that there's not a heart and soul there, right? And I think we should really try to lean into developing the youth as early as we can, and develop technology tools, resources, and content that really enable them to succeed in life and better our future. They are carrying our future. We have an obligation to make it set them up for that success.
Yeah, and I would say, listen, we're about to come into this moment. We were joking yesterday about that moment of coming out of the cave. What I would challenge everybody to do is think right now, what is the thing we should be thinking about in the next 30 days? What's the thing that's going to help set the tone, the pace, and the momentum we need to get through this next 6 months, a year, 5 years? Because it is different. We're all going to walk outside and it's going to be different. What could you do now to really inspire change going forward? And what are the foundations that you can put in place that will really ripple through society as positivity?
What I want to encourage everybody out there to think about is how to be something positive, a positive force for positive change. To really think about how do you integrate tech as a positive force, in your education, but in how you're going to use that education to have an important impact on the world.